We're standing in a very important place this morning. In this valley, one of the most important biblical battles took place around 3,000 years ago. But before we go to the battle itself, I want to explain to you a little bit about where we are and why the battle took place in this area. So first of all, the land of Israel is divided into several geographical units. You have the coastal plain on the far west, where the land of Israel meets the Mediterranean coast. And then when you come a little bit inland, you have a unit that's called the Shvela, or the lowlands. And this is an area where the soil is chalk and you have gently rolling hills. And then as you begin to come up towards Jerusalem, you have the area of the Judean hills, or the Judean mountains, that are made of limestone, and those mountains are more pronounced. So where we're standing this morning, this area is between the coastal plain and the Judean hills. So we're actually in the lowlands. And this area, in fact, made the border between the kingdom of Judah, that was going to the north and the west of here, and the Philistine territory. Now, scripture tells us a lot of interesting things about the Philistines. First of all, we believe that the Philistines actually came into the land of Israel at the same time that the Israelites were leaving Egypt and coming up into the land of Israel. So it was almost as if there was a counterfeit movement of people. Now, scripture tells us that the Philistines came from Kaftor, and we believe that that is the area close to Greece, to Macedonia of today. And so they come from the west and they come into the land, and they were a seafaring people. They were very comfortable with the water, and so they settled in the area of the southern coastal plain. And scripture tells us that they had 5 cities, and their cities were Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gaza, Ekron, and Gat. Now where I'm standing today is about 8 kilometers, or around 5 miles from Gat. And for that reason, this area was very heavily fortified, because the Judahites, those people who were living in the kingdom of Judah, the Jewish people, they knew that they faced a very serious enemy, giants, very strong people, just a little bit to their west. So they needed to fortify this whole area. Now, during the biblical period, this area was also very highly populated. There were many, many towns and villages in this area. It was a very high concentration of Jewish population. One of the ways that we know where the Jewish people were living, and that it was not a Philistine town, was the complete absence of pig bones, because the Jewish people were not allowed to eat pigs, and the peoples who'd come further from the west, pigs were a very important part of their diet. So we have Gat a little bit in that direction, and behind me in this direction you can see a very large and very wide valley. This is the valley of Ellah. And if you would follow it in that direction, you would get all the way to Bethlehem and also towards Jerusalem. So actually where I am, it was like an ancient highway that went from the coastal plain all the way up to Jerusalem. And if we relate that to the story of 1 Samuel 17, the young David has been tending his father's sheep in Bethlehem, and he comes up each day to this area. Why does he do it? 1 Samuel 17 tells us that he's actually bringing food to his brothers who are part of the Israelite army, who are wanting to contend with Goliath. Now, this area is very special because it is one of those moments in scripture, and there are a few of them, like Mount Carmel, where you actually come and stand in the location, you can see the incredible precision of the biblical narrative. So if I go for just a moment to 1 Samuel 17, it says, "Now the Philistines assembled their armies to battle. They were gathered at Socho of Judah." Now if I just point in this direction, there is a mountain over on the other side of this valley where we discovered Socho. We know for sure that it is the place called Socho because we found a large number of jar handles that were actually inscribed with "to the king of Socho." And so it was a kind of administrative way of storing things that would be kept for the use of the king. Perhaps at the time that King Hezekiah was king and he was collecting supplies in anticipation of Sennacherib, who was going to come from the northeast and attack the land. So what the scripture says next, they camped in Ephes Damim. What is Ephes Damim? Well, it's literally no blood. Why no blood? Because this was an extraordinary battle. It was a battle that was won without any blood being shed, except the blood of the poor giant Goliath, right? Because the stone came and hit him in the head, he fell to the ground, and then David cuts his head off. So this area, this valley, was also known as Ephes Damim, no blood, and it was located between Soho, behind me, and Azaka, behind where the camera is. We also discovered the tell of Azaka, or the ancient settlement of Azaka, and we found a lot of evidence that that really is the place. So we can be 99.999% sure that where I am standing is very close to the area where the battle took place. There are some other clues also. It is called the Valley of Ellah, and just over here you can see all of these trees. The Ellah tree is an acacia tree, and this is the only part of the land of Israel today where you can find that type of acacia tree still in location in the modern day period. There are different types of acacia tree mentioned in scripture. Another one is the Nile acacia that was used for the building of the ark. So if you can imagine, David is coming from Bethlehem in this direction, coming up in this area. You've got the Philistine army in Soho, you've got the Israelite army above, and they're going to clash in this area. And often, historically, the battles would take place on border areas. One kingdom is wanting to push in one direction, another kingdom is wanting to push in another direction. So you're going to have a battle to see who is going to gain dominion over the land. And if you think about it, the kingdom of Judah historically is one of the most important kingdoms that has ever existed. If we think about what the kingdom of Judah has given to humanity, they gave them the Bible. The kingdom of Judah gave humanity monotheism. The kingdom of Judah eventually also gives humanity the Messiah. So you can imagine that the enemy really does not like the kingdom of Judah. And that is why it has seen so much opposition, both in the historical periods, in the biblical periods, and right up today, until today, when we still have our modern day Philistines trying to prevent us from living in this part of the country.